Straighten up the elf hat. Let's do it. How's it going? I'm Denver. And this video is the first in its series. We'll all be going through various monsters from Dungeons & Dragons and exploring them not just as cool combat enemies, but as valuable narrative devices for dungeon masters to use to convey information about the world, the lore, and help the characters have better, more fulfilling roleplay opportunities. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment down below, all that good stuff if you want to see more content like this or that I outlined. Also, there's going to be a question at the end of this video, so make sure you stick around for that. Be sure to answer it too, because I'm going to pick my favorite one from the comments and respond to it and give my thoughts on it in the next video. This is my first video in the series. It's also my first video ever. So, really like, comment, do all the cool stuff. I think I've said that a lot. Do you say that a lot? I've said like and comment a lot. I guess do it. Anyway, here's the video. Do I have an intro? So to start this series off right, I can think of no monster more befitting than the dragon. It's half the name of the game just past the ampersand. And anybody who's getting into tabletop games is probably likely to pick up D&D first, which means that their intro to tabletop games is going to be a game called Dungeons and Dragons. It doesn't actually say Monster Manual on there. It says Dungeons and Dragons Monster Manual. The game comes pre-baked with this expectation that these creatures are going to be featured. That can put a lot of stress on a dungeon master, right? I mean, what if you want to run a setting that doesn't have dragons? What if you want to run a setting where they don't work or behave like they're outlined in the book? These things are totally fine, you can definitely do that. But I think that when you make those choices, you're saying a lot about your world. I think it could be really useful to talk about how other forms of media handle them. I know for me personally, before I had ever heard of Dungeons & Dragons as an actual thing I could spend my time doing, I had seen other fantasy media. I think it's the 4th book. They're doing the Triwizard tournament, and they have to fight a dragon. And I remember thinking when I watched that, like, oh, okay, that's a great CGI looking dragon. It's very beast-like, very sort of like a caged dog almost in its personality. We fast forward to me getting into D&D, and when I read in the monster manual that the average dragon stat block features common as a language, I had to start to reconcile some things. See, because even that right there gives us insight to how the game is expecting these creatures to be presented. If they can speak common, they can speak to people, right? They could talk to creatures, gain allies, likely have personality. They could be egotistical, greedy, etc. I remember thinking that that's the strangest thing. That if I wanted to put a dragon in my world and run it out of the book, like it's written and like the game expects it to be, it's gonna have to be able to talk. It could reason with the party. Could it yield in combat? Could it fly, deceive? And I would later find out that yes, these sort of attributes and ways of running dragons are totally expected, and I've seen them in other games now too. But when I was just starting out, this didn't, on its face, seem so obvious. Which is one of the reasons I wanted to make this video. If you are fairly new to world building, or you're not quite sure what you're saying when you use a specific monster, this video hopefully will serve as a guide for you when it comes time to put dragons on your table. I would say generally dragons are going to be very subjective to the tone of the campaign that you're running. A post-apocalyptic sort of sword and sorcery game versus a sort of Candle Beyond the Witchlight, Fern, and Fairy type game are going to have very different looking dragons. These ones may be battle cunning and all ferocious. A more toned down game might be crafty, tricky, more prone towards trying to deceive or otherwise infiltrate the party through kind of extra means. When should you use a dragon in your game? I know for me personally, at this point, I view them as the perfect tool when I need to throw something at my party that is insurmountable and iconic. There are a couple things that scratch a similar itch to a dragon for me, but none of them are followed up by being something quite as iconic and awe-inspiring. Something insurmountable could be something like Tarrasque, or Giant Clan, perhaps, a Prince of the Hells, maybe. These things can be very insurmountable. Powerful spellcaster, always a safe bet. But there's something uniquely iconic about the dragon. In my main campaign that I've been running for 5 or so years now, shout out to the Bastards of Glencarth, dragons weren't always prevalent in the world. The campaign started and they had gone missing, extinct, or never really were an actual creature. They described the myth, that sort of thing. Eventually, the party was in a southern port city celebrating a festival, and a storm rolled in. And hand in hand with a natural disaster, dragons were reintroduced to the world. And I feel like natural disaster is a great way to conceptualize what sort of feelings we want to invoke when it comes to using dragons. See, I think dragons should not be cheap. The solution should not always be, or even directly be, the blade in a character's hand. If you're finding your dragons reduced to a stack of hit points in that way, that the paladin can smite them down and they're not much more than a standard Tuesday night combat encounter, you may want to consider adding more weight to your dragons. And there's different ways to do that depending on which pillar of play you find your dragons lacking. We'll start with travel. So travel, of the 3 pillars of play being travel, social, and combat encounters, using dragons in a travel encounter really comes down to understanding how they might influence their environment. Now, the Monster Manual and other supplementary books are going to explain how a dragon's lair can impact its surrounding region. But I think taking it an additional step further can help give your dragons a sense of weight when you put them down at the table. For example, putting them in an area that the party wouldn't expect them to be. A red dragon on a snowy mountain might cause the snow to melt. You could potentially give more intuitive characters a clue about what's to come. A great travel encounter that I would recommend you steal is having the party need to get from city A to city B, and in between the 2 cities sits a mountain range occupied by a very powerful dragon. Let's say they have a time frame that they have to get from A to B in. It's like the quickest route would be right near the mountain. Now, this is going to require a collective stealth and coordination, the acquisition of resources in order to better help their odds. What sort of beasts do you have towed this cart? Do you need a cart? Are they all on horseback? Are there other mounts that they could take to potentially get from A to B? These sorts of questions start to come to mind, and they all stem from how the dragon impacts the environment. If the dragon lives here, how does that impact the party who needs to be here? On to the next pillar of play, social. Keeping in line with making sure your dragons have weight, Fitzbans does a great job at outlining the sorts of personalities that dragons can have. Greed, or things that they want, right? We should think of them as separate entities, characters in of themselves. What do they want? Why do they exist in your world, and what are they there for? Understanding these questions can help you as a dungeon master more better flesh out. What did I say? More better? Is that how you say that? Can help you better flesh. Well, yeah, can help you flesh out. Can help you flesh out your world. Additionally, and this is something that I only realized fairly recently, a number of dragons in the game can transform, per the rules, into humanoid forms and interact with humans and other humanoid creatures like that. Consider, what the dragon is there for, what it would do with the abilities at its disposal to meet its ends, and then what opportunities the party might have to interfere with those plans if they so choose to. So one more thing to add about social encounters. Dragons having cults is sick. Them amassing followers and using their force of personality and force of power in order to sway lesser beings to follow them and then go out into the world and do their bidding is another great way that you can show a dragon's influence without it being a combat encounter or even a travel encounter. This is entirely social. The party continuously finding all of these disenfranchised people that have pledged allegiance to this far off and unknown entity that in and of itself is incredibly powerful is a campaign right there. Finally, it comes down to combat. There's a couple considerations that I would give a dungeon master who wants to run a dragon in combat. Keep in mind they fly, and they have no immediate reason to want to get particularly close to a creature. Now, their breath weapon, they get back on a 5 or 6 of a roll of a d6, so they're not going to have that all the time, which means they might need to resort to their bite or their tail attack. But generally, to me, a dragon is going to take advantage of its space, and it's going to breathe down the elemental destruction that it was made to down on any contested party members. There's a final feature on the dragon stat block that I don't personally love, and I have a sort of remedy for it, and that's Frightful Presence. Frightful Presence as an ability exists to convey the fear and terror that characters might be experiencing when fighting a dragon. Again, this is an insurmountable and iconic creature. Seeing its wings out and it breathing elements into the air and onto the ground should be terrifying. But if we can't get the party, or the players rather, to experience that hesitation when it comes to fighting, if they're not shakingly rolling initiative, or if they're not screaming at each other about how they got into a given situation and they feel prepared to fight this dragon, Frightful Presence is there to continue to facilitate that this creature has a lot at its disposal. But it doesn't work very great. It's an action on the dragon's part to do so, and it chooses any number of creatures that it can see within range, But after they succeed on the saving throw, they've overcome the fear. My proposed fix is to tone down the penalty that comes from the frightful presence and maybe only make the frightened condition one option on a table that is rolled on. I also think it'd be in the dragon's interest if characters could continuously fail on this table while making the penalties not as punishing. So consistent failure isn't the end of the encounter, but it is a powerful setback. And that's mainly it. Dragons are a great narrative device, and they're probably one of the more powerful ones that we as Dungeon Masters have disposal to. I mean, again, half the name of the game for good reason. Potential considerations that I would urge you to make before you go world building is asking yourself, why were the dragons created and by whom? I'm assuming your world has gods in the pantheon. What purpose were they originally intended to serve, and have they deviated from that? My question for the end of this video, and the one that I'm excited to read your comments about, are if dragons exist in your world, why aren't they in charge of everything? I'll give my answer to that question as best as I can, because the real answer to it is still unknown by the party playing that campaign. Shout out bastards at Blendkarth. The dragons that exist in my world now have returned to the world. They were gone for a period of time to some unknown place, and in their return have realized that their coalition is in the name of some greater entity. So the party is unsure if that's a greater threat or greater ally or what that relationship is. There's something above all the dragons in the world that's preventing them from just wreaking unknowable amounts of havoc. And that's it for the dragon video. Keep an eye out. I'm going to try and make a video a week as my schedule, going through all the different monsters and giving some different insights for how we can better use them. And with that, I didn't write an outro, and I don't really know how to end a YouTube video. Stealth check. 17.